Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Marshall, and I am the Cabinet Chair of the Architecture and Design Alumni Cabinet. On behalf of the Cabinet and the College of Architecture and Design, I would like to welcome you all to this year's Pellerin Traveling Fellowship presentation. Before we get to this evening's presentation by the 2014 Fellowship recipient and the announcement of the 2015 Fellow, I would like to take a few moments to thank the members of the Alumni Cabinet and the University, and especially the graduate professors who have worked tirelessly with the nominated students over their graduate career in order for them to become successful and well-established LTU alumni. Which reminds me, we're always looking for alumni involvement to magnify LTU's presence in the architecture and design community. If you're interested in becoming more involved in upcoming alumni activities, be sure to check out our Facebook page and connect with me or one of the other cabinet members in attendance tonight. And back to the real reason for being here tonight, I would like to recognize the efforts of Scott Schall, Jim Stevens, Cabinet-elect Samantha Shazilski, and past Cabinet Chair Tracy Sweeney for their contributions for this year on the Pellerin Fellowship Selection Committee, and Martin Schwartz for all of his input and coordination. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. Established by the Alumni Cabinet in honor of Dr. Earl Pellerin, the fellowship provides unique educational value to students that have the commitment and determination to enhance the design community. Earl W. Pellerin was the first professor of architecture, a member of the faculty for 42 years, and the founding dean of the College of Architecture and Design here at LTU. He believed that travel is an important part of an architect's education. The Pellerin Traveling Fellowship honors one faculty-nominated meritorious graduate student annually. Nominated students have demonstrated exceptional talent in their design studio and thesis work. Stay tuned after the lecture for more about this year's nominees, but with that lead-in, I would like to introduce the 2014 Pellerin Fellow for her lecture tonight. At this time last year, Megan Martin Campbell was announced the 2014 Pellerin Traveling Fellowship recipient. Megan is here tonight to present her Pellerin Fellowship Travel Studies in Kyoto, Tokyo, studies that were an extension of her studio and thesis work here at LTU, entitled Miyagi, Japan, a study of activism architecture. This charted the clearest terrain and trajectory, and I'll let her cover that in more detail. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Megan Martin Campbell.
Thank you. Whoa, that's loud. Thank you very much for that introduction. Before I get started, I just want to take a moment and thank everybody for coming out here tonight. I consider it a privilege to be here before you today, to show you some of the things that I was doing in Japan. The intent of the fellowship was to study the rebuilding strategy of the Tohoku region, which was devastated by the events following the Great Northeast Japan earthquake that occurred on March 11, 2011. Here's a couple of places that I was gone for 5 weeks during this study fellowship, and I visited 15 cities. And I took time to understand part of the region because I was unfamiliar with Japanese architecture prior to maybe the last 2 years. So I took the first 2 weeks to visit these Tokyo and all of the areas south of that in that time period. And then after that, I spent the last 3.5 weeks up in Tohoku. Sorry. So the Great Northeast Japan earthquake that occurred on 3/11, this was a magnitude 9.0 earthquake. It was triggered, what it did was it triggered an unimaginable tsunami. This tsunami would topple seawalls along 400 miles of coastline. Equivalent, I'll try to give you a size comparison here of what the Tohoku region actually is comparison to. This would be the equivalent of a tsunami hitting perhaps the coastline of Michigan, Lake Michigan. This area, the tsunami flooded more than 300 square miles of developed and agricultural land. It washed away entire towns and villages, with waves in some areas tapping 50 feet. Nagawa, in places like Nagawa, this is Nagawa here, and also in another city that we'll look at today, which is Ishinomaki, which was a 33-foot tsunami that came through. This event scattered debris all around the Pacific, and it left more than 20,000 people dead or missing. During the course of my travels, I said during the Tohoku area, I visited projects in 7 locations: Kesanuma, Raikusen Takata, Sendai, Awanuma, Notori, Nagawa, and Ishinomaki. Those last 2 are the 2 cities that we're going to cover today. I won't be able to cover all of them unless this becomes a 1-part series and maybe 10. But rather, I've selected 2 areas of focus, Nagawa and Ishinomaki. And I chose these to highlight those locations. I chose to highlight these locations because I believe that they are implementing 2 inherently different strategies on how they are engaging public interest design. Raikusen Takata is a northern region, the most northern city that I went to. This area actually has, the city was, there's really nothing left. Only in the foothills are there actually homes left. And this is actually the largest scale disaster out of all of them that we will cover. I just wanted to touch on this because the one thing that's really important here is that this, as you can see these, I'm looking towards the ocean right now in this picture. So one of the big things that has been happening in this area is they are taking part of the mountains, and because they don't have enough, they do not have enough buildable land that is high enough from the sea. So what they're doing is they're cutting down part of their mountains and then they are filling. So what you're looking at is about 35 feet of fill. And this is common in all the other port cities in Nagawa, or in Tohoku. So another similar case would be Nagawa. It will be you'll see the same things in Ishinomaki. You'll see the same things happening in Raikusen Takata and in Kesanuma. Kesanuma is very similar to Nagawa, which I will cover, but the difference is it's about 7 times the size. And if you've ever seen any pictures from the tsunami, you'll see a lot of ships that were pushed into ports. And this is one of the reasons why this city, you'll see some of the things in the background survived, but the things that were close to the shore didn't survive because of the shipping fleet that came in. This is Nagawa. This is, again, about the 7th size of the city you just saw. But this city, there was only, I think 95% of the buildings were taken out in this building. And the ones that remained standing were later bulldozed. Ishinomaki is a city that has, it's one of the largest cities in Tohoku, outside of Sendai. It has about 170,000 people in it. And one of the reasons why I looked at this one was because it was an urban context versus the other ones were small, rural port towns. Awanuma, and the next one is Notori. These 2 are right next to each other, and these are actually the 2 cities that I included in my proposal when I first wrote it. This is located at this is just down from Sendai. It's probably about 5-minute train ride. And this is an area that, unlike the other towns that I just showed you, which were along the Shinjuku coastline, this one is actually a flat plain. There's a lot of agriculture that's happening here. So what they're doing is quite different. The method of study for the activism architecture model was to focus on social, political, and cultural obligations of the design professional. My expectations for this travel fellowship were not a design solution, but rather I was trying to expand my understanding of the practice of activist architecture by studying a current model in a culture unlike my own and in an area of high risk of natural disaster. So some of you might be asking yourself, what's activist architecture? Allow me to answer a question with a question. Who can architecture help? Who benefits from architecture? These two questions appear to have the same answer. Occasionally they might, often they do not. Similar to medicine and law, architecture has the means and services to address the breadth of society. However, often those that benefit from architecture and architectural services are those with means, money, and political influence. Our profession has been formulated around chasing and competing amongst ourselves of commissions from corporations, wealthy individuals, and institutions, rather than identifying and addressing issues in our own communities or helping those that are the least off. In a recent opinion article, Jason McGarrick summarized the relationship of architects and those practicing activism as saying that they operate at different extremes of the social spectrum, one serving capital and the other aiding in those disenfranchised by it. Activism in architecture seeks to address the uneven distribution of design services, particularly in low-income and underserved communities, recognizing the social injustice in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. Architects are positioned to address situations such as community development, humanitarian and environmental crisis, and inadequate and temporary housing. Brian Bell spoke here a couple of years ago, and he had a couple of really awesome things to say, if you had the chance to hear him. One of his quotes that he has is that architects are have a responsibility to create the physical world and in a way that gives the best answers to improve conditions and make process towards public benefit. Architects serve as the general public, just as other professionals do. He believes that in every community, every kind of structure, and even the most modest public space deserve to be beautiful, practical, accessible, and sustainable. He believes that architecture is a collaborative profession and that some of the most important collaborators are the neighbors of the place where that structure will be built and the people that will be using it. So in my proposal, I said that I was going to use the activist architecture model to study and evaluate, in a way, what was happening in Tohoku and in these different areas that are being rebuilt. What do I mean by that? So I looked at 7 factors. These are part seed, part Ed Orlowski influenced, but they are the situation, the ecosystem, the actors, the advocates, the precedents, the realizations, the response, and the impacts. I'm not going to go into detail over every one of these and try to categorize every project, but I'll touch on these as I go through. So listen for key phrases. Nagawa. Nagawa is a port city. Its main economic driver is its fishing fleet. There's also a nuclear power plant that is located nearby. This is a city of about 10,000 people. And in 2010, this was basically where all of the buildings were built. So I'm going to take a look at the topography in this area, and you'll notice that where they're putting their buildings are actually, they're within about 20 meters of the sea. This blue indicates the tsunami that came in, the inundation areas, they call it. And afterward, what the after effect was. This is about a month after the tsunami hit. What you're seeing in the foreground here on the left is the brick building is actually the municipality, And what you're seeing in the back, up at the very top, is a lake. And that's actually over by Ishinomaki. This tsunami actually went up and over and into that lake. I didn't take this picture. I think that's pretty obvious, right? But I did take this one. This is actually, if you're all the way on the corner of that picture, there's a temple way up top. And if you were standing if you were standing here, you're 40 feet above sea level. And this is still, that's the current state of it right now, the stairs going up to that temple. So this is what it looks like now. We're going to focus in on one area. In this area, there's a couple of areas of prefab temporary housing, and there are also a couple of projects that I'm going to address are going to be the container temporary housing and a hotel called El Faro, and then lastly we'll cover Nagawa JR train station. So in the first project that I was looking at what is the process of recovery for residential areas, and what the situation was. The situation is that you can't, right now, you cannot build anything in Nagawa. You can't have anything that has a foundation. And there was a law that was passed a month after the tsunami came through because they wanted to make sure that whatever they ended up building for the whole town, that they would build it back better. And they didn't want to continue the cycle that they have. So to just review the cycle, basically we have evacuation centers. Evacuation centers are municipal buildings, they are gymnasiums, they are schools, they are community buildings. These are meant to be occupied for maybe 2 weeks. Then you go into temporary housing. Temporary housing is prefabricated units. They can be, there's a number of different ones that you can use, but we're not going to go into those. We're just going to focus on the prefabricated ones. Typically, there's actually another law that says that you can only stay in temporary housing for 2 years. And from there, you move to permanent housing. So permanent housing is you'd build your own home, or you could go into subsidized public housing. This is important because we look at evacuation centers, and this is kind of like a typical response to evacuation shelter, okay? And so there's a gentleman that you're probably all aware of, Sergio Bon. He is very active in humanitarian relief. And so he has other projects that he's dealt with. He worked in Sri Lanka, he worked in Rwanda, he's worked other places to address this problem, because the big problem here is privacy. So he came up with a partition system. That partition system, after this event, he came in and said, let's do another version of that. So they have another version of it, and it's really simple. It's just paper tubes with some canvas, and they're separating each family. This gives privacy, even a little bit of privacy, to each family, and they're about 160 square feet each. He put this in 50 evacuation centers in the Tohoku region, and it was all done by private donation. And he did it through his architecture volunteer architects network. Like I said, there's 2 different types of temporary housing in Nagawa. There is prefabricated, and then there's the container one. And the container one was a response to the prefabricated, and the prefabricated, this picture is actually a response to that one. And then here's an example of one building right now that's recently completed a public housing in Nagawa. Where you're at right now is just below that would be the container housing from Sergio Bon. So let's talk about that. So the container housing that happened here, so he was in Nagawa. Sergio Bon was in Nagawa, and he was saying, why is this taking so long? Why are there so many people in evacuation shelters still? They should only be there a few weeks. And it had been going on to 4 to 6 months. And the reason was because Nagawa, because doesn't have enough available land to build on, they had to, it was causing delays. And the reason for it, the challenge for it was because there was Typically, prefabricated homes are only 1 story and they're row housing. So they take up a lot of room. So they need to come up with a different solution. So he went to the government and said, hey, let's do something else. Like, why don't we stack these things? But try to do it in the same amount of money. So he came up with a system that was a 2-story and a 3-story solution that used shipping containers. And he stacked them in a way that he could actually get like 3 different orientations of layouts for them. And they have a little bit of color to them. It's actually, one thing that's really nice about this is all the other prefabricated units that are in the city, they're all gray and they're all blue, gray with a blue stripe. And these, even though most of this place is white, it actually is pretty remarkable how warm it is. This area, because temporary housing can only be put on land that is high enough that will be safe from tsunami, and it has to be on land that is already publicly owned. So they retrofitted a baseball diamond. And actually, Nagawa stood out as a city that was in the area, even though it was a small rural town, it had a huge sports complex. And so that's where actually the housing that I showed you that was the permanent housing that was just finished, that's called athletic park housing, because that's also sitting on an old soccer pitch. So what are some of the things that he resolved with this? He prefabricated units, not these, but prefabricated units, they don't come with any furniture. They don't come with a veranda. They don't come with any shades. They don't come with any of like these creature comforts, and also like things that will actually make the space useful to you, right? So what he did was he built in all the furniture. He added the things that like a veranda for people to come in. So and those spaces were also useful for everyday things such as like hanging laundry and having a place to come in, a formal place to come in before you enter into the rest of the home so you can take your shoes off, which is very important. Like I said, he did a couple of different layouts in here. And a lot of the furniture actually came back from feedback that they actually did. So VAN, Volunteer Architects Network, actually went out and they interviewed 2,500 evacuees in their temporary housing units and came back with all of the survey information. And the 10 things that they said that they wanted is the things that he incorporated in. Again, the verandas and the built-in furniture. On the back of this unit, this also is a good one. The back of these, around the edge of where the baseball diamond is, there's lockers. And the lockers were storage. There's no storage in regular temporary housing. The other thing that they added, the biggest thing on that survey when it came back was that there were no community spaces. So he put a market in. So he used shipping containers again, and he organized them in a fashion and then put a tinsel structure over them. And this is used all year round to host a litany of different things. I've heard that there was, they teach classes out here, they have fruit markets, they sell little bags that they make out of used kimonos. The one thing I did want to, reason why I kept this picture in was because were only meant to be up for 2 years, and they've been up for 4.5. So they are showing their wear a little bit, but they are not showing their, in comparison, I'm not going to show you any of the pictures of the prefabricated units, the gray ones in town, but they're way worse than this. But I don't know, the space and how much this creates a community is really something special in this place. There's other buildings that are incorporated with this development. One of them is the Paper Atelier, which is here, which is actually a business development area. There's actually a couple of different shops that are in here currently. There's also a community room, which is, again, there's 2 shipping containers this is actually, I thought this was interesting. There's a picture of what it was like before they actually use it, and now it's, they have crafts in here. There's actually a bunch of people in here when I went, but they didn't want to have their picture taken, so. But they're doing crafts in there, and they're learning how to do all these community engagement pieces. And one thing, I just want to pause and say that because there's actually, when Sergio Bond finished this development, he said he actually had a little bit of guilt because he made this so much better than the other fabricated housing that was in the city already. And so he went back and he proposed changes to the other ones so that they would have insulation, so that they would have those verandas and those areas where they have outside of their little spaces. The next facility I'm going to go over is called Alfaro. The situation here was that, again, you can't build anything permanent yet. So one of the problems is you have volunteers that are coming in, you've got workers coming in from all over the place, and yet there's no place for anybody to stay. And up until March of this year, the train station wasn't open. So if you were to come to Nagawa, you can only stay there for a couple hours, and then you got to take the bus back to Sendai, and it'll take you about 3 hours. So if you're going to come to this space, come to the city, you were very limited on where you could stay and what you could do. So a gentleman came in named Yaro Yasef, came in and said, hey, what about, weren't there hotels here before? Where are the innkeepers? And so there was 7 innkeepers that were in the town, and they said, let's come together and open up a new facility. So the new facility that they would have it's actually travel trailers. And they hired an architect to come in, and they designed the trailers, and they designed the site plan. And now, so instead of it being a building that is on a foundation, because that was really the problem, now they are they're considered a parking lot. And they'll have a future, one of the measures for success for this project was that I was wondering how many people they actually get. So they're typically sold out every day of the week. Half of the facility is used mainly for people who are temporary workers, and the other half are people like me who were curious and came to the city. They also have a restaurant that serves breakfast and dinner, and it's pretty amazing. And the other thing that was really interesting is that this became a driver for other things that were happening in this area. So again, everything is prefabricated, but what you're seeing here is this is a restaurant that's open at night, and that's a laundry facility. And then there's also a rice mill that's just down the way, and there's also another convenience store, and then recently they just finished a hall for people to gather in that are just over by it. And that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for things like Alfaro coming in and bringing in people that were spending money or that were and starting to restart that economy in the city. Pretty spectacular place. And the largest room I stayed in all of Japan. This is kind of in the back. So Alfaro is off to the side, and what you're seeing in the back is a bunch of temporary housing. This is in the back area of the city up by the mountains. All right, so Nagawa Station. So this was a regular commission for Sergio Bond. This was not a pro bono job. But he wouldn't have gotten it if he hadn't have built trust within his community, if he hadn't have reached out and gotten the city to buy into the process that he was using to address those issues of privacy and those issues of getting people out of those evacuation centers. So the station just recently opened. It opened in March of 2015, and it's a 3-story facility. It is made out of all local materials except for the paper tubes that he used in various locations. The train station, like I said, is 3 stories. So the first story is part it's part of the train station and part of the services for the train station. But on the other side, it's a community space. It's a store, and there's also a library piece that is a component of this. On the second floor, there is a community center on the one side, which is in the second plan here, it's on this side. And then on that side is actually an onsen. An onsen is a public bath, very popular in Japan. A place for relaxation, a place for community growth. And They didn't have one anymore since the tsunami. There used to be an onsen that was really close to the former train station, but it wasn't there any longer. So an important piece of this is, and how it kind of ties back to the other two projects that he was working on, was that in a way this was a solution to addressing those community pieces that were missing in the other housing units that he did not do. And if you're looking back at the city and you're saying, like I said, most of the city was destroyed in the tsunami, and then when they're rebuilding it, they end up tearing down the rest of it, and there's a lot of emptiness. So when a city no longer has its historical and cultural context that's been taken from them, the thing that's most important is really the growth of the community and bringing people back together, because that's what's really going to make the city strive and move forward. This is a group of the community room that's up top. There's actually a couple people in this one. This is the same space. One other thing, the paintings that you see on all the murals for the tile were actually done by people in the community. Everything about this was involvement with people to get them to come together and make something for their community, make their community stronger. This is the little shop up front. Okay, so one of the things so I've just covered Nagawa. Nagawa is a small city and that has drastically changed by the tsunami. Ishinomaki is a little bit of a different story. It's an urban story. And what happened here was really that we have a large city. It's about 160,000 people, and before the tsunami. And there was about 30-foot tsunami wave that came in through this area. This is what it looks like now. And again, look at the topography of this area. This area is unique in comparison to the other cities that I went to, because this was a combination of two things. It was a combination of the Shinjuku coast, which is the rugged terrain, and then it also was the plains. So in this area, it kind of had a little bit of mix of the both, but it also was an urban site versus the other ones were mainly rural. So these are the buildings in Ishinomaki. The blue indicates the ones that were damaged but survived the tsunami. The red are ones that were destroyed, and so was the yellow. So this is about the inundation area of the city. Previously, the inundation, any tsunami that had come through in history hadn't come past this knoll that's happening here. But the area that we're going to focus on is Ishinomaki-cho, which is downtown. Downtown, prior to the tsunami, had some issues. It had a nickname called Shutter Street. And they suffer from a couple of things that might sound familiar. They suffer from suburbanization. There's a lot of big box stores, and there's a lot of huge housing developments happening outside of the downtown. They have an older, grayer population. They have not a lot of youth that are in this city. They're there, but they're just not empowered. So there's two projects that I wanted to highlight here. One of them is Ishinomaki Laboratory. Ishinomaki Laboratory is there's a story of this gentleman. He's an architect in Tokyo, and he has clients in Ishinomaki. When the tsunami came, he was worried for his client. And so he went up to go see him. And the first time he could get there was 10 days after the tsunami. And when he got there, him and a bunch of his friends were all meeting in a little shop in the second floor. And they got together and they basically brainstormed a community development organization. And the first thing in that was about empowering people to make it better, and everything will be okay. Always having a positive outlook. So one of the things that they started doing was they looked around and they said, in the downtown area, I don't have any place to sit. I don't have any place to, I don't have, like, all the furniture that they were getting for the places that they were living in were donations from other places, and they had no control over it. So they lived in an area where they felt like they had no control. So Ishinomaki Laboratory is all about DIY. It's about teaching people how to build furniture. It's teaching them how to build their community back better. When I got to Ishinomaki, one of the things that was interesting about this was that there were, I went to 3 different locations to try to find them, which was rather difficult when you don't speak the language. And kind of find out, I thought they went up. I thought they went under, okay? So turns out they haven't. They're actually prospering. They keep going into bigger and bigger places, and that's the reason why I couldn't find them. And anyways, I had to go actually pretty far away. I had to take a taxi to get there, which was an adventure in and of itself. So they pride themselves on these kits that they make, and besides making everything in their laboratory that they have, they also they have different classes that they teach for the youth. They have different classes that they do in the high schools. They have classes that they teach out in the temporary housing units, and they started expanding. And as they've become more and more popular, they've been adding them into, they've become part of other organizations that are in town, which I'll get to in a second. So the couple of people that you're seeing here, almost none of these people are designers. Actually, most of them are sushi chefs, or they had other professions prior to this, but they wanted to improve their community, and so they just kind of came together and they did this. This was this is Shimbu, who is the second gentleman from the right, and we were working through a couple of things about what was so important about Ishinomaki Laboratory. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is Ishinomaki 2.0. Ishinomaki 2.0 and Ishinomaki Laboratory are actually really close together. They're actually like really tight organizations. There's a lot of the same people. But Ishinomaki 2.0 is, they're basically a community development organization. But what they're doing is they have all these different arms, and they're prolific in everything that they do. So when I first met them, they were in their shop. This is called the IRORI shop. And it's basically an innovation center that they have. And again, when I got to Ishinomaki, there were several. I had about a list of like 30 places that I was going to, and the first 10 that I went to weren't there anymore. And I was really kind of worried. And I went around to a bunch of different ones. I ended up just going back to Airori because I didn't really understand why there were so many things that were, like the map that I had wasn't right. And turns out that there are actually a lot of different organizations that were happening. So I was looking for the 30 that I thought were there, and there were actually like 60. And they were morphing all the time. So what they're doing is they're trying to fill in these gaps in the community that exist, but some of them don't make it. Some of them do make it. And the key thing about them is that they're creating opportunity for people to then start again. So the people that maybe their business didn't make it, but they are still in another business, they've just morphed into something else, and they learn from that. This is a school, a children's school that they put together that's on the main road in the downtown area. Another area was called the Commons. There's so many projects by them, I couldn't possibly cover them, but I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. This is the Commons, and this is just an eatery area that's a gap filler in an empty lot in Ishinomaki. This is a temporary mall that's happening there. This is called Recovery Bar. This is a direct connection to Ishinomaki Laboratory. All of the wood and all of the all of the finished work that was done in here was all done. It was the first project of Ishinomaki Laboratory. The gentleman is Gato, actually the gentleman that started all of this. Again, they're prolific. They have a publication that they give out for free that is empowering for the community. They also have a radio station that they have. They do Friday night movie cinemas and empty lots, and they use the benches from Ishinomaki Laboratory. They do a thing called 2.0 Excursion, which is they mapped everywhere in the city that's shopping, food, entertainment, interesting historical context, and they do walking tours. IOPA, which is the graphic you see, is think tank for people who want to be web designers and who want to invest in or work in technology. They also have a real estate wing because there's a lot of empty spots. And so they work with landlords to help improve different areas or different properties so that people can come into them. They also have a library that all the information that is in it is all local information. So it's all about empowering and putting forward all of the good qualities of Ishinomaki. And the last thing I'm going to end on is they call it Ishinomaki Stand-Up Week. For 9 days in the end of July and the beginning of August, which just so happens to be the time that I was there, they have an event called Stand-Up Week. They've been doing it every year since the tsunami. And it's gotten bigger and bigger, and they've been incorporating new pieces into it every single year. Taba are these paper ornaments. And that was actually the first year that they had them back. In the end of July, I don't want to go into a big long thing, but in the end of July in northern Japan, there's actually a lot of festivals that are happening. And one of them, and a lot of it has to do with ancestral remembrance and traditions. And there's all these different fairs, and there's all these different well wishes and everything. And so you see these bamboo poles hanging everywhere, and you'll have little sayings that are attached to them. They're all wishes. So when I was in Tokyo and Kyoto, there were actually a lot of them at temples, and they were trees that were suggesting that people write good well wishes for the people in Tohoku. This was also incorporated at a fair. So the fair that was happening, this was over by the Commons, and there's several of these things. It was just, I've never been to someplace so colorful and so many people out it didn't seem sometimes that there was a lot of people that were in this downtown, but man, it's overwhelming. I have a bunch of video from this, but I won't take you there. Just little, getting everyone involved, getting young people, getting old people involved. There was parades every day. There were all of these different lanterns. All the lanterns were the paper ornaments, all of those are made they're made in that 9-day period by groups as they were going, as it was developing. And then they were made for this festival. And they lined the streets in all of downtown. It was quite spectacular. One last thing that they did show, and I had bear with me one second. So I'll end it on this. So on one night, on this Friday night, they have this, it's an ancestry thing in Ishinomaki where you take everyone that has passed away in the last year, they will put out a lantern and they float it down the river. And usually there's about 500. And this has been going on for 115 years. And after the tsunami, they had 10,000 lanterns. And it was one for every 2 people that died. And ever since then, Ishinomaki has been they've been remembering their people that have passed. And so they put down 5,000 lanterns. And they make these, again, in community groups during those 9 days, which is a new thing. All right, so I'm going to close on one last thought with you about activism. Right now in the state of Michigan, we're in a little bit of a building boom, right? Everybody's busy, everybody's hiring. And so I was thinking about what it means to Tohoku and what this means to Tohoku. So in 5 years, they're going to have the Olympics in Tokyo. And what will that mean for these regions? Is it going to mean that construction is going to be way more expensive? Is it going to mean that there's going to be less people available to do the work? These projects that they're doing where they're raising the ground by 10 meters, that's years and years of planning. That takes a long time to actually implement and then actually build something there. So what will this mean? when a lot of our conversation is about this instead of this. So I just wanted to end with that thought. And this is a survey that was done by the, to talk about, again, about this issue with the mayors in Tohoku. Okay. So in ending, one thing I just wanted to leave you with was that architects practicing activism remind us that architecture is a social act, and they provide the exemplars to prove to governments that change is in their grasp. In an ideal world, activist architects would not have to exist. But since the world is far from ideal, we need them badly. Thank you. In these areas, especially in Nagawa, it was at times a really challenging place to be. I didn't show any precedents, but the precedents that I would show would be the comparison of what there would be if there was no activism happening in this town, which means that there would be no hotel, there would be no access to really outsiders, there would be less access to food and water and all of the amenities of life. So because these little events are happening periodically throughout the city, throughout this town, it is giving people hope. And the downtown area, which is still a foundation, I talked to a lot of people about when that would be done. When did they think that there would be some buildings in this area in front of the train station? And they all told me December. And they have great faith in that. So I think they're always looking for the next thing that's going to help them, get back to some sense of normalcy.
So this is something I think about a lot, and you're hitting on it, and that is, I think as architects, we have an obligation to design to the reality of the conditions in which we're working, which is what you're talking about. And after disasters like this, it seems so many times that architects rush to design what they call temporary housing, and I think they're responding to the government's call, or the client's call for something that is temporary. We also know that temporary housing many times is not temporary. We know that temporary mobile classrooms that are at school campuses in the United States for 30 years. So at what point do we, as a profession, if you're an active architect, take a step back and say, is it really temporary? And if that's the case, how do you respond to that? And I don't know, I mean, I'm not asking you to answer the question, but I struggle with that myself, because I did one temporary project and I think, is it really temporary?
So an interesting thing about the container housing, which is the temporary housing which you rented, that is actually sturdy enough to last for some time. And what's happening is that people are moving out of there and into that public housing across the street, and then people from other temporary prefabricated units are moving into that one that are upping.
Yeah.
And then but the other good thing that's happening is because it's able to last longer. People that have left the city because there wasn't room, because they wanted to get out of the evacuation center, so they went to Sendai or they went to Ishinomaki or they went to someplace else. Those people are coming down, and they're staying back in that community. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
Building on my colleague's question, it seems that you focus attention on things such as schools made by sushi chefs and events that grow. And then the other end of the spectrum, there's the so-called temporary housing made with pre-manufactured components stacked up cleverly at times, less cleverly at other times. And it seems like the trajectory of one of those movements is clearly increasing in benefit, right? It's more than sustainable. It's becoming better. And the other seems to be going in the other trajectory. And as I think through that, it saddens me a little bit that the things that we're traditionally associated with seem to be on the wrong, right? The stuff we do nose diving, right? And the stuff that sushi chefs do is growing, right? And I wonder if, and you observe this, and I'm sure it's quite the actors are going to unpack you kind of thinking through this, right? And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm not an answer. Am I alone in this? Did anyone else? It just seemed like we should be focusing on schools with sushi chefs. I don't know. Not really. But how does, so Sigrabon being an example, right, that you cited, of someone where maybe the trajectory of something traditionally aligned with our work is on a different track, is on the sushi chef stool track. Yes? How did he do that in your mind? Or what did you observe there that would lead it?
Well, I think he was building on things. I think he was building on these different relationships that he was learning from, right? So like he started with just the partitions and saying like, hey, I'm working in all these different areas. I'm working in 50 different areas, and then I'm gonna. But then I noticed that there was this other issue because I made that investment in understanding that community. Then I can work on this other thing, and that might be temporary too. But then it should be something that wasn't temporary. The train station's going to be there for longer than we will be, right? So hopefully, and so I think that's how you make that transition, is that you incrementally learn from all the other pieces.
That is a good answer. It's a great answer. It's excellent.
Just interested in your experience there. Like, we talk about the architecture and the building part of it, but culturally, these people now are in a place where they firsthand experienced what do you call it, the risks associated with their location based on the event that happened, the tsunami. What did you take away in terms of how is the culture responding to that? In terms of architects respond to the culture, they now live in a place where they clearly have seen their vulnerability and that sort of thing. And although it's not a commonplace occurrence, they've seen the capability of it. What was your takeaway in terms of seeing how they're reacting to that, the fact that they're actually staying in a place that everything was wiped clean pretty much, and now they're having to reassess and reevaluate the viability of it. In one sense, they're building large earthen, elevated areas to kind of think about this. But what did you sense from that in terms of either the tenacity or their mindset? Are they moving forward? How do they feel about where they live and what do they want to do there?
I think from several people that I communicated with, there is an innate fear of the ocean, to put it simply. A lot of people actually, there's a fear that people will stay in this temporary housing for a very long time because it's on high ground. The ones I showed you were roughly 50 feet above water, above the ocean. So a lot of people don't want to move any closer because they fear it. And so that's actually happened in other areas so far. People that don't want to move out of temporary housing because of the building too close to the ocean. And I think that's what's driving this whole, in my opinion, kind of quirky idea of let's raise the ground 10 meters, 20 meters in some areas. I mean, there's. This human attraction to the water. Are you seeing now that they're retreating from that coastline? Is that what you're saying? Like, in other words, in the future, we might see in this particular cultural experience, like an enclave that's pulled itself back in a way and responded to that. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I would say that because a lot of these areas, Nagawa, one of the things I did not mention about it, a lot of things I didn't mention about it, but Nagawa is one of the cities in Tohoku that decided not to rebuild their tsunami wall. And instead, they're building up the land. A lot of places are doing both. And so, but anywhere, so we have this, and especially in Michigan, like we have this innate, attraction to the lakes and the water, and we have certain that brings certain memories for us, right? But it brings certain memories for people there. And most of the coastline is not just a beach; it's a concrete wall. So there's really not a lot of access to the water in most places.
So just one last thing, because you told me before you left for this, I wanted to ask you this. You told me you talked about the connection spiritually between the Japanese culture and the natural land around it, right? How are they dealing with the fact that they're tearing mountains to build up these areas? I mean, did you get a sense from them like that they're going to compromise, or is that compromising any of their beliefs? I mean, this is huge stuff.
Yeah, it's in the Nagawa pictures, the aerials. Maybe it's kind of hard to show from the scale that I was showing, but there's actually a lot of clearing in those areas where before there were forests and there were peaks, and now there's a lot of flat land where there eventually will be housing development. One of the things with that housing development and any further construction really is that they made this calculation of what they actually needed to do in order to actually build up into a different area so they wouldn't continue this cycle. And what they found out was that it would take I don't know the number, but it's like let's say 1 billion yards of dirt to make it work. Well, just so happens that was how much they needed to cut, and so they're using both. So they are cutting that, and then they are filling with that, but then now they're hopefully using both areas to develop again. But I think that there's compromises they just have to make. There's been this is the only tsunami that's reached this area. I mean, they get tsunamis pretty regularly. On average, they're only about 6 feet though, and but the thing is, you've had so many of these, maybe every 40 or 50 years, you have a big tsunami that comes through and it's going to wipe out these communities again. And so I feel from my understanding, you have people that are, you have now communities and municipalities that are saying, you know what, we're not going to take this so far and then forget it and then go build where we were going to build last time. We're actually going to make a difference and we're going to do it this time. And I think that that's outweighing a lot of other decisions that you're going to make.
Kind of based on what you were talking about, do you see this kind of creating a socioeconomic strife between those kind of who live or move in places that are higher up or further away from the ocean, versus those that, because of their means and because of their situation, have to go to these homes that they're afraid to live in?
still I felt like I was doing something. Maybe that's just the architecture stuff, but it definitely opened up a different train of thought on so many levels of how to deal with people. I'll admit that I was pretty ignorant about how it would be like to be in a disaster area. And so many times I would talk to people that were in these limited talk people. I don't speak Japanese or Takata, which is the dialect. But you had these pieces that were just very difficult, and I couldn't relate to them. I feel like I can relate to, I mean, we work on a lot of projects in Detroit, and there's a way of like relating always, right? In a region, you can relate. But in that, there were so many times where I felt like I was being really invasive to people. And I had to like tote that line of like what I did and what I didn't do. I really wanted to see like the inside of one of these container housing pieces, but I wouldn't dare after I got there. There's like so many pieces of that. So I think my sensitivity to certain issues really changed. Instead of just being really driven, being like, I got to think about what, really think about what the impact would be.
I have one more question. We'll piggyback on Ed. In terms of relaying some of the research and your observations to the city of Detroit, I'm trying to think about how do you connect that to where you're practicing now. You talk a lot about, you created a preamble to many slides that there's temporary and public are the two criteria. And then the last few slides show the power of the temporary and the event to change development, new economies, cultural draw. And I started thinking about the vacancy and issues that we're dealing with in the city of Detroit. Did your research ever start to tell you that it did change policy? Did it ever change land use to the point where temporary became permanent from a political standpoint or from a city planning standpoint? And I guess this is larger, count for the students to think of, but these kind of projects, even though it's very specific to a natural disaster, there's many threads that you talked about tonight that we can actually apply here to some of the redevelopment. But the question is, did you see any permanent change based on policy and land use based on the site?
Definitely. I think it's easier to apply that to Ishinomaki, especially when you're talking about Detroit. I feel like there was maybe it's because of my bias that I'm from here, but I felt like I saw things of Detroit everywhere there. Like when I looked at Ishinomaki 2.0, the more I got into it, the more I was like, this is just Japanese beehive, right? Except for it's more, it's not just about entrepreneurialism, it's about all these other pieces, and it's also about like, throwing out all of your information and making sure that everybody knows what you're doing, right? That's part of the whole activism and entrepreneurial part of it is make advertising for yourself. There was a lot of policy things that were happening in Ishinomaki. So the whole land use of, in Ishinomaki there was only about 6 feet of water that was coming into that downtown area. And because of that, a lot of buildings weren't destroyed. Only like the ones that had been vacant were the ones that went and they tore them down. So there left a lot of gaps. And so the city planning commission actually came in and said, hey, they were trying to address it, but they weren't getting anywhere. And it was people that didn't live there, they were all like suburbanites. And so it's this group that came in, Ishinomaki 2.0, that said, hey, let's propose these different pieces. And so now they aren't just this rural organization, they're working with the municipality. And they are changing how land use is being done inside the city. And again, working with, it's not just them, it's also the landowners, it's also the property owners of these buildings and making sure that they can get back up on their feet or they become a space that's usable again. So. Anybody else?
Hi, everybody. Ooh, I figured it out. That's awesome. Put this back here. Okay, So we have one more really important thing to do tonight. I'm Tracy. I'm the past chair of the Alumni Cabinet. And before we get on to this year's winner, I want one more big round of applause for all of Megan's work. That was an amazing lecture. So I can't have all the fun by myself up here, so I'd like to ask Scott and Jim and Amy and Martin if you would all come up here so that we can recognize the nominees and the winners for this year. So here's a really big lesson for all the students. When someone gives you a microphone, the first thing you should think about doing is recruiting backup dancers, and that's what I'm doing right now. Lesson number 2 is when you recruit backup dancers, they need to be not just pretty faces, they need to do some good for you. So I'm gonna make Scott read these names so that I don't mess up anybody's name. Yeah. Okay, so I have a plan. This is how this is gonna work. Okay, so here is how all of this is gonna work. We're gonna read all of the nominees who submitted a proposal for this year, and Scott's gonna take care of that for me. And then we're gonna talk about the Pellerin Fellow for this year. So come on.
So you have a list for me?
I do,
I
right
didn't
here.
memorize it. Oh, fabulous.
So these ones and those ones right there.
Oh, we're here. All right. So I have 2 choices, either to try to pronounce them all correctly or to slaughter them all so that no one, all right. Well, you'll tell which way I've pursued in a moment. Can I say other things aside from the name? Or just, I'm allowed just the names? Just the names.
I'm handing it over.
Oh, that's a dangerous thing. I do want to say, and I mean this, and you're supposed to say this. I think they say this before every Academy Award or any other award. Everyone was a qualified applicant, right? All amazing. I truly mean that. The applications this year were simply stunning, and I would love to post them online. It was an excruciating decision, not because they were all really bad. That would have been excruciating in a different way, but because they were all excellent. And so I want to thank, I truly am pleased to be able to announce all of the folks who submitted, because everyone who did submit deserves recognition, because the submissions were fabulous. Mention what? We have the certificates. Oh, we have certificates for you afterwards, and a $10 gift certificate to Applebee's. I made that last part up, but you can go ask Tracy for this and see what she does. All right. Stephen Bolin. Yeah, the dean was like, "Did we pay for that?" Stephen, yeah. Oh, you can just stand up, okay, and we can clap. Way to go, Stephen. Brianne Bush. I saw you. Breck Crandall. Mingwei Hong. No. Someone stand up. Emily Matt. And Shannon Ifreti. Oh, Shannon? Thank you. And I think that's the end of my application. Yeah. Oh, thank you. All right, fabulous.
And a round of applause for Scott, because he did great. Hey. Okay. So, as we mentioned earlier, the intent of the Pellerin Traveling Fellowship is to honor one faculty-nominated meritorious graduate student annually. We had a little problem with that this year. As Scott alluded, the submissions, quite frankly, were the best that I've seen in the 3 years that we've been on the cabinet. And we had some opportunities, I think, this year. A lot of the submitters had considered locations that were cost-effective, and that gave us a little bit of leeway, and had been very responsible with that. And so we decided to kind of in an unprecedented way just break the rules this year. And so here's what's going to happen. We, for the first time ever, have an honorable mention. And how that's going to work is we have one that is a fully funded fellow that will receive the money they requested in their proposal. The honorable mention will be a partially funded award, and that individual can speak to Scott and to the team afterwards, and we'll work out all the details of that. But just so that you know, we have one that was fully funded for what this person asked for in the proposal. I have to use very gender neutral things right now, so I don't give anything away. And then, so one will be partially funded. So, with no further ado, I would like to talk about our honorable mention. Drum roll, please. They did. Will you guys do anything I ask you to do? Because I have ideas. This is great. Okay. Some of them are legal. Okay. Please welcome up here our honorable mention fellow, Brett Crandall. I even found the right one. Okay, so while the handshaking is happening, because there's a lot of it, let me tell you that Brecht's proposal, titled Cultures of Migration, Transient Cultures, an architectural study of the nomadic seafaring groups of Southeast Asia, proposes to take him to the Southeast Asian coasts of Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia to pursue his interest in the movement and flexibility of the built environment. His contacts include the Moken tourist team, Dr., and I'm gonna start messing these up really bad now, Dr. Widodo Johan, that's we're gonna go with that, of the National University of Singapore, Jimmy Masrin of the of Habitat for Humanity, and the Togian Islands Tour Information Group. So I think what we usually do is allow like a 2-minute at the mic. Is there anything you'd like to say regarding your proposal? Come on up.
Wow.
putting everybody on
Yeah,
the
I
mic
wasn't
tonight.
expecting that. No, it's a great honor, and I'm very humbled to be able to stand here. I didn't expect this. That was a wing. I believe this has something to do with the new faculty up there. But thank you very much. No, I'm excited to be able to continue traveling. As some of you may or may not know, Lawrence Tech actually wasn't my first option when going to a master's school. But after, you probably remember this, Scott, I came into your office and I talked to you for a while about I wanted to struggle through taking the tests and making applications for other grad schools. But after all is said and done, and I've spent an extra 2 years here, I can comfortably say in front of everyone here that staying at Lawrence Tech for my master's program was one of the best decisions I ever made. And the opportunity to travel through the program that Steve Coy started, and the stuff that I did with Jim, and the digital fabrication that Jim's integrated into the whole thing, and the opportunity to work with the leadership of these four standing right here has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. So, thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more very important thing to do tonight before we go back out and see if there's any cookies left at the table outside. That's important too, right? Okay. We did really well at this last time. Drum roll, please. This year's Pellerin Traveling Fellow, Brianne Bush. So Brianne's proposal will be the one that is fully funded for what she requested in the proposal, and her proposal, titled Perception of Place, a study of media influences on architecture, charted the clearest terrain and trajectory. She was really good in how she kind of explained how the travel would further her studies. She's planning an intense 30-day travel schedule in Cuba, including study in Havana and 6 other cities, and participating in an international study tour of Havana and the Havana International Charrette on urban design. Her contacts include noted Cuban architect and author Julio Cesar Perez Hernandez, the architects of Tres Cabarrocas Architects, Abby Gordon of Shapley Bulfinch, of course I mess up the American one, and architect and author John Loomis. So please welcome Brianne, and we're gonna give her a minute to take the stage.
Well, let me take a second, take a deep breath. This is really unexpected, and I'm really, really grateful for the opportunities that I've had here at Lawrence Tech, and I second everything Breck said. My educational experience here has been phenomenal, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. The amount of mentorship that I've had through my undergraduate and my graduate education by all these people standing on stage and most of the people in the audience has been I've been truly blessed with that. So thank you all so much. I look forward to continuing the conversation about Cuba a year from now when you are all sitting here in this room and I have more to present to you. So thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So clearly the team from Inform has set the standard for how we're supposed to stock the auditorium next year. So we do expect all of you to be back here next year. We're going to work something out so that we can maybe present work from both. And we're going to work that out because, like I said, we broke the rules and now we have to live with the consequences. So we're going to figure out how to do that. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Megan, for your wonderful lecture. We should have some refreshments still in the hallway for anybody that wants to stick around and talk about it. Thank you, guys.